All right, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Shona Whyte. She received her bachelor's degree in zoology from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland and a PhD from Aberdeen University studying the infection dynamics of the eye fluke in rainbow trout and the host immune response. She received a postdoctoral fellowship from the Institute of Aquaculture in Stirling University, Scotland, to investigate the efficacy of a novel chemotherapeutic and prophylactic treatments for sea lice infestations in cultured Atlantic salmon. Currently, she is the senior scientist and adjunct professor and graduate program faculty in the Department of Pathology and Microbiology, the Atlantic Veterinary College at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. Dr. Whyte also received a master's degree in business administration in 2012 from the University of Prince Edward Island. And she's got a long and amazing resume, but most relevant for today's presentation, Dr. Whyte has served on the editorial board of the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health as an associate editor in 2014 to 2019, and has been the editor of the journal since January of 2020. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to your talk.
All right, thank you for having me. So today I'm going to talk about the peer review process. I know that Dr. Jeff Wolf, the other co-editor of the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health, gave a great talk on how to develop a manuscript, how to create a manuscript that would be suitable for submission to a journal. And so I'm going to follow on from his lead and discuss the peer review process and what happens once you have your manuscript in hand and then you want to submit it to a journal. And I'll talk in generalities about the publishing or the peer review process and submitting to a journal, but a lot of the examples that I'll use will be specific to the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health. So let me start. Why is it not starting? There we go. So here you have your article, you've submitted it to the journal, and we're going to go through the peer review process. So the first thing that happens is that you submit it to the journal office, and the journal office generally does a journal quality check. So I'll talk about the specifics of what they do, but generally for completeness, English, plagiarism, does it fit with the scope of the journal? They then send it to the editor or have a conversation with the editor about whether it's appropriate to go forward into the process. And at this stage, we can, the manuscript could be rejected for a variety of reasons, or it could be considered that it's not appropriate for this journal, and we could recommend that it's transferred to another journal within the Wiley publisher publication. So the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health is part of Wiley, which is the publisher. Then we have the associate editor is assigned to the manuscript. For the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health, that is actually done by the journal office, and it's not actually done by the editor. On occasion, the journal office will communicate with the editor and ask if it's appropriate to send it to a specific associate editor based on their qualifications and area of expertise. But generally, manuscripts are assigned to the associate editor by the journal office. The associate editor then, once they receive it, have to send it out to a variety of reviewers. And we usually recommend that 2 reviewers are selected, but that could be expanded to 3 or 4, depending on reasons that the associate editor would seem appropriate, or if more expertise is required. So at that point, the reviewers submit their review, it goes back up the chain to associate editor, and then back to me, the editor, and then we make a decision. And the decisions can be reject or accept, which is unusual generally, because we generally do have comments, and what is more often the case, it's generally revisions, and those can be major or minor revisions. And so then it goes back to the author, and the author makes the revisions, and we can go around at least twice through the process, again, from the editor back to the associate editor, reviewers, authors, and then back. So that circuit can be done at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, but generally not more than 3. Once the publication or the manuscript is considered acceptable for publication, it then moves into the production side of the journal. So the author would then start communicating with a copy editor or the production team, and they would go through assessing the quality of the manuscript from a grammatical and typesetting perspective. It would then go into production, and then finally publication either online and then in print. So that's the process. Quite complex, really, with a lot of different players involved. But as I go through the talk, hopefully you'll see there are specific themes that come out in the process that each of us that are involved in that process, all the roles that are involved, we all have really the same theme with regard to our role in the process. So the manuscript type, there are 3 basic manuscript types. The main one is what we consider articles. These are for substantial research papers or critical timely reviews of specific topics or features where we would have a paper or a manuscript that we would consider that would be especially important or of interest to the journal audience. And these generally don't exceed more than 5,000 words. So that's basically a guideline. It could be less than 5,000 or a little bit more than 5,000. It's not an absolute word count. The second type would be communications, which are short papers, more restricted, generally preliminary type work or work that adds to an already existing body of work, but is small in its scope and may be used to jump to a broader or more in-depth research study. It can also be case history. So if there are clinicians or pathologists that have something interesting that they feel would be of value and interest to the audience, they can submit those. And those are we would generally consider those to be communications. And again, there's a word count that's a guideline of 3,000 words. And the last type is mainly called what we would term comments. So these can be critiques of papers that are already published in the journal. And the original authors would then have an opportunity to comment on the critique. They could be brief presentations or journal letters to the editor or letters to the journal through the editor on technical issues that would be pertinent to the community and the audience for the journal. So those are the 3 main types. So we talk about peer review. So what is peer review and why do we need it? So proponents, so we're going to talk about the proponents because later on I'll talk about the critics of peer review. So on one side, we would consider this to be the gatekeeper of sound science by virtue of the fact that researchers submit their manuscripts for review by their peers for critical review and comment. And the reason for doing that is it allows the researchers and the broader general public to have this confidence in the knowledge that there's a robustness to the scientific process. And that's really important when we consider that we want to have funders, and funding is oftentimes public funding agencies. And we want them to know that there's rigor in assessing the science and that they can put their trust in the research output. So in that sense, we're improving the quality and the scientific merit of scientific research. So this is an established process that's well received and known throughout scientific communities worldwide. So we maintain scientific standards. It's the journal reputation and trust in the journal by experts in the field. And it's also there to try and flag science that could be fraudulent or flawed in study design or in the interpretation of the results that were generated. and also to point out any serious bias or conflict of interest. And most importantly, it helps the editor decide what qualifies as publishable science within the scope of the journal. And so I've just put here the scope for the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health as it's stated on the website. And it's interesting, we all read scientific publications from a variety of journals, but probably very rarely go and look at what the scope is of those journals. And it's interesting to actually take some time and go and read what the scope actually is for these journals. So questionable scientific practices, research practices, what would those encompass? So I've already spoken about fraud. That would be data fabrication, falsification of data, manipulation of data that would be for the purposes of misrepresenting the findings. And that could include also omitting information that would affect or interpret the conclusion. So basically cherry picking data that you would put, that an individual would put into publication for a specific gain. Duplicate submissions, and I've seen this where we've had publication manuscripts submitted to the journal with research findings, and then come to find that it's actually being published or in other journals or other publications such as magazines or industry magazines or technical literature. Inadequate citations, so submission of papers where there's inappropriate cross-referencing, failure to give credit to prior work, deliberately neglecting to cite or discuss related work, even if it's the author's own work. And they may do this so that the publication that they're trying to get published appears to be more novel than it actually is. Plagiarism, I talked about that right at the start. This is what when the paper comes into the journal office, there's a software program that they use to detect plagiarism and the percentage of plagiarism in the manuscript. And that would be one of the reasons for desk rejection, is that the percentage of plagiarism in the manuscript is too high, and which leads you to suspect that it's actually a duplication of others' work. Reviewer misconduct, where it would be a failure to declare your conflict of interest, or the reviewer could block or delay publication of competing work, and also, for example, giving a negative review and then using the information that's in that unpublished document to then further your own specific research, which is also unethical. And then authorship misconduct. So that could be omitting individuals that contributed to the manuscript, or adding individuals that didn't contribute anything to the manuscript, or adding individuals to the manuscript as in the author list and then not telling them that they're actually authors on the publication. And so they've never seen the manuscript, a draft, and know nothing about it. So types of peer review. So as I said, the peer review system is not without criticism, and there are inaccuracies, and we do know, and I've seen this in manuscripts that we've rejected when I've been the editor, that those manuscripts then go on to be published in other journals. And those criticisms are a part of the process, because the process is conducted by humans and we're not perfect. And so there's going to be errors and inconsistencies in the process. However, considering all that, it's not sufficient enough to just get rid of the process altogether, which some groups do advocate for. So the types of peer review, and there are a number of different types. The most common, and the one that we use in Journal of Aquatic Animal Health, is the single blind peer review, where authors will submit their manuscript, but they would not then know the identity of the reviewers, but the reviewer would see the identity of the author. Other ones are double blind, where neither the authors nor the reviewers know each other's identities, and triple blind, where the editor is then unknown to both either the authors or the editor. Sorry, just going to remove this. And then there are other ones, transferable peer review, which we have, and you may see if you've actually been a reviewer for a journal. Sometimes they will ask you, are you okay with your name being known to an editor if we decide to transfer it, and do you want your review to be made known to the editor? So that's what that's referring to in terms of transferable peer review. And then the other ones, third-party peer review, post-publication peer review, and open peer review are more linked to open access publications. And the open peer review is more about the author's identity and the reviewer's identity are made known, and that the review is also public, so that anybody looking at the manuscript will also be able to see who the reviewers were and what they said about the publication or the manuscript. And the same with the other two. And if you're interested in this, it's you can Google this types of peer review, and there's a lot of information on this if you are interested and want to follow up on it. So in terms of open peer review, there are concerns about open peer review. It has its benefits in being transparent and allowing individuals to see the comments and the process that takes place, but there's also concerns. And those concerns are about compromising confidentiality and privacy, and really some fear of retaliation within institutions or groups. It can encourage or discourage honest feedback because of that. And it can also thereby introduce new forms of bias and influence by peers. If the individuals know who the reviewers are, there's a possibility of this retaliation or influence. And it's not suitable or feasible for all disciplines or journals. And in a recent paper, they were able to identify that few reviewers would voluntarily sign their reviews. So if you're a reviewer, you should think about, would you be willing to sign your review and want it to be made public? So when you're reviewing something, keep in your mind that kind of helps you formulate the type of review that you would submit. Men are almost 2 times more likely than women to sign their comments to the authors. And this was done in the Journal of Functional Ecology, and that this difference persisted over time. So in 2003, 2005, and then and then 10 years later, you can see that the difference is still there, even though both males and females were willing to sign it. There was still this discrepancy between gender. The same thing happens in geographic regions, where the proportion of peer reviewers that sign their comments to the authors are different. And you can see there that in North America and Europe, there's a higher level of, there's still that difference between male and female, but they're still willing to do it. But when we are looking at countries in Asia and Africa, there's women generally are not signing any reviews at all, and that's likely due to cultural differences. And again, however the perceptions is of career advancement and how it may potentially affect them in their careers. So reviewers sign their positive reviews more often than their negative reviews, and author-suggested reviews commonly sign their reviews. So author-suggested reviews, when the authors submit their publication, there's often an opportunity for them to say, who do you recommend to review your publication? And that's what is referred to here as author-suggested reviewers. And the last one was that signed reviews are longer and recommend more references to authors, and potentially that's a positive reflection of the fact that it's open to the public and to scrutiny. So now what do the critics say? So the critics say that this peer review is the weakest link in the process of scientific review. And that's because it's time consuming and it's expensive, and that all these delays can hamper the progress through publications, for career advancement, for applying for grants to granting agency, lots of different reasons how it can hamper the progress of research. Notoriety, so there was a publication that indicated that prestigious authors are accepted at a rate of 87% when their names were present, but when the names were redacted, this percentage dropped to 68%. There could be editorial misuse of authority, so that the editor can interfere in the process, slow it down or speed it up through favoritism or for other reasons. We've already indicated that, shown the bias between gender and geography, and there's also conflicts of interest. And the process can detect obvious omissions and errors, but is it capable of actually detecting determined fraud? And I'll show you in a couple of slides that it can't always. There's no grading system about quality of the peer review. We do know that between journals, there's different standards, that between reviewers, there's not consistency. There's no way to assess the expertise and quality of reviewers or editors. And in fact, there's been studies done where they've submitted publications to one journal and where it's been rejected, and then submitted to other journals and it's been accepted, and vice versa. So this consistency, there is no consistency, and that links back to the comment about human involvement in the process. The other thing is that more and more the internet is allowing less reputable journals to have a large readership and easier access and use. And what I refer to specifically there are what we would term predatory journals, or pseudoscience journals, or fraudulent journals. And these are just basically a business model that whose main profit is, his main goal is for profit by hiding publication fees. They falsely claim to provide peer review. There's generally no editorial or publishing service, whether it's open access or traditional subscription type, and they offer a quick turnaround time. The characteristics of these, and I'm sure most of you have received emails soliciting you to be part of editorial boards, and I would pretty much guess that a huge proportion of the emails that you would receive are from this type of journal. They would accept articles quickly with little or no peer review, and that would include hoax and nonsensical papers. And this, I think, links to academia, where oftentimes the currency of success is publications, and there's a significant amount of pressure on individuals to publish, and some individuals find it easy to publish in these types of journals, and the information that's being imparted is rubbish or nonsense. These journals will notify academics after the papers have been accepted that there is an article fee that needs to be paid. They aggressively campaign for academics to submit articles or serve on editorial boards. They will list academics as members of editorial boards without their permission. In fact, there's a record of deceased individuals being named to editorial boards without any permission. Obviously, it's kind of stupid, no permission, but which is really kind of unethical. And the individuals that are still alive and assigned to these boards find it very difficult to have their names removed or be able to resign from them. They'll appoint fake academics to the editorial boards. They'll mimic the name or the website style of more established journals. They'll make misleading claims about the publishing operation or location of the journal office, and they'll also cite fake impact factors. So almost like parasites on the system. So here's a fraud experiment that was published by a group of individuals in 2017, just to show you, to talk about these predatory journals. And so in 2015, this group of researchers created a fake profile of a scientist called Anna O. Suits. They had created fake degrees with a fake book chapters in her CV. They created accounts on academic websites like academia. They made a fake web page at an institute in Poland. And her page could only be accessed through a link provided on her CV. She had no citations in any literature database, and her CV listed no articles in academic journals and indicated that she had no experience as a reviewer or an editor. They had made fake book chapters and books, and those books and chapters could not be found in any search engine, and the publishing houses that they were published in were also fake. And so then they took this information and they sent it to 360 journals, 120 from each of well-known directories. So the JCR, which we're going to call our control group, because this is the journals with the official impact factor that's indexed in journal citation reports, which is controlled by Clarivate Analytics, and they're the biometric group that essentially take all the information from journals and assess their how well they're doing compared to each other and generate impact factors. Then we have the DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals. So this is just a list of current open access journals. And then they also used what's called Beale's list, and this refers to a librarian called Jeffrey Beale, who was originally from the University of Colorado, who created this list of potential predatory journals and publishers. So 120 were each of these applications were sent to each of these three groups. And so when we look at the results of this, 40 predatory journals accepted Seuss as editor without any background vetting and often within days or even hours. So 40 journals accepted her without any question. None of the 120 sample journals listed in the journal citation reports, which is our control group, offered Seuss a position, which they have, and those are the ones that have the standard publishing, standard in quality of publishing, ethical publishing practices. But then she also didn't receive any response from these control journals. So if we look at that, 60% of the journals provided no response, which to me is a little bit concerning that they didn't write back and say, what is this? This is ridiculous. It's totally fake, and don't send us stuff like this again. And in the Directory of Open Access Journals, about 7% of them accepted Seuss as an editor. Now they went and subsequently in 2016 had a purge of journals, or purge, and they removed some of the affected journals that had accepted her as an editor, but not all of them. So here's deliberate fraud. So this individual, Jan Hendrik Schön, so he was a German researcher. His specialization was in condensed matter physics and nanotechnology. He was a real kind of whiz kid. He was a lead author on more than 90 publications in about 3 years, mostly in industry leading journals. And in less than 5 years after finishing graduate school, he was in contention for being nominated for a Nobel Prize. So a really whiz kid in his field. However, in around April of 2002, there was questions arising that not everything was right with his data. And there was a couple of researchers who were filing a patent application. And in so doing, they were referencing this individual, and they discovered that he had duplication of graphs. So he had identical graphs being used to illustrate outcomes of completely different experiments in many publications on different subjects, including journals such as Nature and Science. And so when this all came out, it came to light, and there was an investigation made, he had said to Nature that he was confident in his results, and to Science he had said, I haven't done anything wrong. But as the investigation proceeded, it was found that he had actually kept no lab notes, and that all the raw data files that he had been erased from his computer, and all his experimental samples had been discarded or damaged beyond repair. So ultimately, other researchers have since tried to replicate his results and can't. The 21 papers in the Nature, Science, and Physical Review that were found to be fraudulent were retracted. He was fired by his employer, which was Bell Labs. His PhD was revoked by the University of Constance, and sanctions against him were made by the German Research Foundation for a period of time that prevented him from participating in research. The other thing about this is that he was not sole author on some of these publications, that he actually had co-authors. And there was questions about and during the investigations, there was questions about what they knew and how these publications had been allowed to go forward for review by not only the reviewers and the peer review process, but also by the individuals that were also listed on the publications with them. So just an example of deliberate fraud and how difficult it is in the peer review process to pick up this kind of stuff. So what can be done to improve the process? There's really four thought areas, groups of thought around this. One is to evaluate and improve the research quality and reproducibility. So they would suggest the way to do that is through reviewer training, maybe including a reviewer specifically to assess the statistical analysis in papers, revealing reviewer identity, and blinding author identities. Equity and inclusion, which is making it more equitable and inclusive, obviously. So that's all about diversity. How diverse is the editorial process? Is geographically or from gender or ethnicity? And then double blinding peer review, their suggestion. The other one is making it more democratic and transparent, which is about reviewer accountability. Soundness only peer review, which is just looking at the scientific merit or the soundness of the content of the manuscript, rather than looking at, is it novel? Does it advance the field? This group focused on open peer review and other types of review that are related to open peer review, and making the identities of everybody in the process public. And the last one is improving efficiency of peer review and incentives for reviewers. So there's a lot of pressure on peer review system, there's reviewer fatigue. And so this is about transferring peer reviews between journals and having reviewer recognition. And so really the improvement of the process would probably be a combination of all of these areas. So now looking at we've moved right kind of into the roles of the individuals involved in the process. So the American Fisheries Society have 5 journals, and they use 2 different types of structure for its journals at present. But generally we have an editor and associate editors. And I talked about the journal office and what they do. The editors-in-chief and the editors are the gatekeepers. We're there to assess suitability of manuscripts. We make the final decision on publications. Associate editors provide expert opinion. They recruit and assign reviewers. They provide the editors with a judgment on the suitability of publication. And the reviewers, even though they're at the bottom of this particular slide, are extremely important in the process. They have the expertise, they evaluate the scientific merit of the manuscript, and they complete the reviews hopefully in a timely manner. Journal office, as I say, they manage the day-to-day operations of the journal. They technically screen the manuscripts for English content. We receive a number of manuscripts from outside of English-speaking nations, and it's a big challenge for the process to manage that. We want to make all those publications have the same opportunity to undergo a fair review, but sometimes it's very difficult if the English is poor. We want to maintain a high standard of ethical practice, so that's ethics involving humans and on animal subjects, and plagiarism. So those are the main areas, main functions of the journal office. The common reasons for desk rejection then are kind of obvious. It would be plagiarism or duplicate submission, incomplete submissions, so they're missing specific requirements within the manuscript. The language is not sufficient for peer review. The article does not conform to the author guidelines, and it does not fall within the aims and the scope of the work. It's not of interest to the journal audience. The role of the editor, someone like me, is to monitor the process to ensure that it's fair, that it's timely, that it's thorough, and that there's a civility to the peer review process. I don't, in my short time as editor, I haven't thankfully had come across incivility, but I know that in other journals that has happened. We make the final editorial decision after comments from the review process. We give an unbiased consideration to all manuscripts, which is what I was kind of getting at with, even if the English is bad or poor, which makes it difficult to understand, we still try to give a fair assessment. We have the responsibility to accept papers or reject, even and not go back to associate editors if we feel that it would just prolong the process. We maintain confidentiality and also ensure that there's no conflict of interest. Associate editors, they read the manuscript. Kind of obvious, but it's not obvious. So the associate editor should read the manuscript. They should notify the editor for conflict of interest or it's outside their topic of expertise. They assess it for suitability for peer review, and then they select at least 2 reviewers. They then read the comments and they assess whether they're fair and adequate. If they don't think that they're fair or adequate, they can go back to the reviewers and request additional information, or they can request, go and find an additional reviewers. To remember that all the reviews that are submitted represent the journal response, and they're read by the authors. Even if it's not an open review process, their authors are still reviewing the comments. And so what we want to see is scientific rigor, but a neutral, professional, and focused comment on the manuscript. The associate editor should then summarize the main points. They can provide their own review. I personally find that if the associate editors do provide their own review, I welcome that because it helps me make a decision. I'm not an expert in all fields, so there are lots of public papers that come across my desk that I value the comments from the associate reviewers who are the experts in that area. They then recommend a decision to me, and then I'm follow through. I might go back to them and ask questions, and then we make a decision and it's directed to the author. What I expect from a reviewer: confidentiality. Technically, and I know that this has happened, that a reviewer may ask their colleague or a close colleague or their spouse, if their spouse has a particular expertise, to review the manuscript. Technically, they should come back to the editor and ask if that's permissible. It's always good to have individuals recognized for their efforts in the review process. Disclosure of conflict of interest. Competence, are you competent? And just because you have years of involvement in a particular area doesn't necessarily mean that you may be knowledgeable in certain areas, and it's always a good idea perhaps to encourage younger individuals at the start of their career to get involved in the process of reviewing. Issues stay within your scope, don't veer off subject. If you're not sure what the scope is, then go to the journal website or speak to the editors or contact the journal office. They're very helpful and they'd be more than happy to help you with any questions. Timeliness and responsiveness is number one, really. And I know that people are busy, and this is the most challenging, I think, for anybody in the entire process, myself included. We want constructive critique, as I said before. Look at the scientific merit, the originality in the scope, acknowledge positive and negative, make feedback. Don't just say, this is great, this is a great manuscript, tell me why it's a great manuscript. This is a terrible manuscript. You have to provide comments as to why, specific comments, because you're telling the editor and the author what it is specifically about the paper that you think should be changed, and they need to understand that so that when they come back with their revisions, it's moving the process forward rather than stagnating. Focus on the research, and so I've said that because it's about the English, and we have a lot of frustration, I think, within this review process about papers that come in with English, with poor English. Oftentimes I could see comments saying, this is a really great information, it adds to the body of knowledge, but unfortunately I can't critically assess it because the English is poor. And that's difficult, because then what do? We send it back to them as a rejection, or we send it back and ask them to have it reviewed by an English-speaking language service, which many journals, including Wiley, and many publishers, including Wiley, provide for free. So that happens frequently, just because sometimes the English is too poor to understand the meaning of the intent of what is being said. Other times there's grammatical errors, and you don't necessarily as a reviewer have to make changes to that unless it's going to help the clarity of the meaning and improve the writing for the author. No ethical concerns, not just fraud and plagiarism, but any ethical mistreatment of animals, and then any similarities to the manuscripts that would be known to you as the reviewer, as the expert in that field. Reasons for becoming reviewers, they're pretty consistent. There's lots of surveys on this. This is a Publins 2018 survey. Number one is they feel that it's part of their job as a researcher, so part of their scholarly endeavor, that they want to reciprocate what could then be their requirement. So most reviewers are researchers themselves, and they have to submit their publications, and their peers then review their work. So those are the two main. The third one there, keep up to date with latest research trends. I know that I've just noticed that none of that adds up to 100%. But those are the key areas where individuals have indicated the reasons for becoming a reviewer. How do you identify qualified reviewers? Well, this is the most time-consuming and challenging aspect of our editor's role. There's a notice there saying 75% of journal editors find that trying to find reviewers is the hardest part of the job. And in fact, I've seen summaries where they've said that this is increasing. The amount of time required to find reviewers is increasing, and the number of times that the editors have to go out and to ask people to review is increasing. So it's not just once or twice, it's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times to try and find a reviewer for the process. You can check the references in the article. You can use tools and databases to find it. You can paste the title into into Google and see what comes up and look for other researchers that are working in that area. You can network at meetings and conferences. You can ask reviewers who decline for suggestions for other reviewers, and oftentimes the journal, when you are requested to be a reviewer, then that's a question that comes up when you decline to review. You can use previous reviewers, and you can use early researchers or junior colleagues. You can ask to co-review with them. You can mentor them into the position. It's a great opportunity for people to get into the process, to think critically and to assess research. Other problems. So this is very interesting. Established regions review more than emerging regions relative to respective outputs. And so emerging regions, and I've got them listed here, as this was a review in the Royal Society in 2021, and they've indicated here that China, India, Turkey, and Iran are these emerging regions, and they review substantially less than their demand for reviewers. So their reviews completed is in the red, and the manuscripts submitted is in the blue. And you can see that their submissions are way ahead of their actual reviews. Whereas in the US, it's the opposite. And it shows that many journals rely on US reviewers, which is limiting in terms of numbers of reviewers available and the diversity available, and also would contribute to reviewer fatigue. The reason is time consuming. Academics are busy. They have difficulty adhering to the tight deadlines. And at a certain point in an academic's career, what's the point in doing it? It doesn't add any value to their career in the sense of advancement, and they probably have many other things that are on their plate, and so this generally falls off the plate, not because they don't want to do it, but just generally because they don't have time. This is where these early career researchers can come in. They're not being involved enough, and co-reviewing should probably be more acceptable, and guidance and support for new reviewers needs improving, and the reviewer needs to feel more valued. That's a theme that comes out a lot when you read up on the reasons why. So the reasons for declining, there it says too busy, generally outside the area of expertise, and the deadline's too short. Those are the main reasons why. And you can see here, I put in the Journal of Aquatic Animal Health reviewer engagement, and you can see the yellow there, the number of invitations declined versus the number of invitations accepted and reviews completed. It's almost more than 50%, more than half of the numbers. The turnaround time. So this publication in 2021 was interesting. It looked at 82 fisheries and related journals. And the outcome of this was that timeliness of publication was an important factor in deciding what journal researchers were submitting their articles to. And they found that desires and expectations for turnaround time were often not met. And so they had a statistic here of 43% rated time to first decision as slow or very slow. And then they also said authors in life sciences expect peer review to take less than 30 days. And I put that little face in because that's my face when I read that, because I was like, that's not going to happen. That's really unrealistic. The survey in conservation biology had 86% perceived the optimal duration was less than 8 weeks, but the actual time that they experienced was 14 weeks. And more than 50% believed that lengthy peer reviews had a detrimental impact on their careers, and individuals reported that it affected their acceptance into, well, it was basically career moves and delays on degree conferral. So it's the number one frustration, I would say, in authors in the review process is turnaround time. So retainment of reviewers. So we've already talked about we need to diversify the reviewer pool because it's highly skewed to the United States right now, and women are less engaged in the peer review process than men. We have 10% of the reviewers are responsible for 50% of the peer review records. This was a survey, again, on Publons. And so we see it as a collective enterprise, but it's not. You're seeing that, as in most things from volunteer organizations, a very small percentage of the individuals do the majority of the work. And they also indicated that, 70% are dedicate less than 1% of their research time to peer review, while 5% dedicate more than 13%. And then in terms of training, 88% believe that peer review training is important, highly important, extremely important for ensuring high quality review. And 80% believe that if they had more training, it would be a positive impact on the overall efficacy of the peer review process. So training individuals in how to be involved in the peer review process and what the expectations are and how you go about it. And it's interesting because if you just Google training resources for peer review, almost every single publisher has something on their website that helps individuals go in and learn about the peer review process, how it's done, how they go about it, how you write a review, what's your expectations. So their training resources are out there, but it seems like the communication of that to authors and reviewers that are asked to review is not, there's a misstep there, and they're not aware that these resources are available. In terms of recognition and reward, recognition is that most reviewers feel that there needs to be better recognition, both from their own institution for the effort that's put in as a scholarly activity, and also from the journals, that they need to have better feedback, and there needs to be better acknowledgement of reviewers that have participated in this process throughout the year. And I know that there are some journals that will send out certificates at the end of the year, or some other incentives for participating in the review process. The other thing is reward, and you can see there that's highlighted in black there, about being paid for doing the review, or having some kind of kickback or discount from the journal on services or products. And the pros in that are that it motivates individuals to conduct reviews, and it would probably increase the speed of the review process. But then we get into kind of the murky area of ethical concerns and introduction of bias. Where does the fee come from? Who would pay for it? Would be likely be transferred back to the authors in increased publication costs and subscription fees. And then would it affect the quality of the review? So all kinds of questions there arise from that. So as a reviewer, what should you look for? So the first thing is you read the manuscript, and there's various views on how you do that. Some people like to review it, read it all first, and then go back and read it again. Other people like to just get right in there and start reading it and writing down their comments and their reviews. There's no ideal method for it. It's personal preference, and something that as you go through it and do it multiple times, you get into your own way of doing it. So how do you write the review? So I would expect that there's two things you would start to do. First of all, you have to provide some confidential comments to the editor. These are comments about the editor, comments about the manuscript, specific elements that you want to raise. You can raise any concerns that you might not want to raise specifically with the authors. You might be more candid in those comments to the author, to the editor. And you just give a general overview. You don't have to provide exactly the same comments as you would to the editor. You can just provide those sorry, you don't need to provide the same comments as you would to the author. You can just submit them to the author because the editor will see it, but any candid or specific comments that you want to make, you can do that to the editor and the authors wouldn't see it. When you do submit your review, you want to provide a brief summary of what it is, a statement on the goal and the major findings. So you can say this paper discusses X, the main contribution is Y. This helps you, the author and the editor, know that you've understood it, you've read it, you grasp the concepts. You can divide it into major sections, or you can just go line by line. The manuscript should have numbers, line numbers. If it doesn't, then you make that comment that it should, and then you can go through each of the sections specifically. You should start with major problems and list more minor comments. You should identify any flaws in any of the areas, the hypothesis, materials and methods, techniques, results, statistics. You give details for the areas to be improved and list changes to be made, and you should always provide reasons why it is required, because that gives direction to the author on how to make the changes, what you're actually looking for, and you should review all the sections. So major comments could be the statistical analysis in the paper is unsuitable or suitable for, and then if you think it's unsuitable, then you should provide what statistical analysis you think should be done. Or you should say, I think you really need to have a consultation with a statistician. Same thing, experimental technique, is it novel, is it conventional? The experimental technique, it should include these specific tests, or if you're trying, if the researcher is trying to investigate a specific question, and you know that they should be using test X and they haven't done that, then that's what should be specifically stated in the review. The methods section does not clearly explain and then say what it is. The results would be better represented as a table or a figure and then say why. Some of the fundamental recent papers in the field are not cited, and then you tell them what the citations are and where they can find them. And I would like to see a discussion of these findings in the paper in relation to recent findings and developments and then go on to describe that. And then same for minor comments. You can say if there's terminology that is used that is not clear, or they use things inconsistently. It could be something minor, like if you get irritated by them saying intestinal, we used intestines, and then later on they're using, we used the guts, that kind of thing. If that irritates you as an editor, then that's the type of thing that you need to point out to them. The figures and the legends, are they legible? Can you see them? You can say on page X is stated this, but the paper by Smith states this. Can you comment on the disparity? Or have you thought about testing with this? You can ask open-ended questions like that to say, have you thought about using this? Have you thought about it in this way? What do you think about if you look at the results from this perspective versus that? Those are the types of comments that you should be making in a good review. So the title is the first introduction to the readers. Is it clear what the manuscript is about? Does it contain unnecessary descriptions? Is the abstract should be a short, clear summary of the aims and the findings and the conclusions. It should stand alone. You should be able to read it and understand what was done in the manuscript without actually having to go into the manuscript. Does it adequately summarize this manuscript? Can it stand alone? Does it contain the necessary information? The introduction sets out the argument. It should have an introduction to the topic. It should highlight the gaps in the information, in the knowledge, and it should establish the research question and the novelty and the reason for doing the research. Does it do that? Is it important? Is it interesting? Does it clearly summarize the current state of the topic? Is it new information, or is it just confirmation of well-known outcomes? Does it add to the knowledge? Does it identify knowledge gaps? Does it clearly explain why the study was necessary? And is the research question clear and appropriate? So by reading the introduction, Do you know what you're expecting to see in the rest of the manuscript? In the methods, this is how they performed the study. It's a blueprint for others to repeat it. They should rationalize specific methodology choices. They should explain their study design. They should indicate why they're doing it, study population, their robustness of the science, their data analysis. So the questions: is there sufficient detail to repeat the experiments? Were study conditions optimal, appropriate? Do they have appropriate methods, techniques? Do they have adequate numbers for reliable data? Is there sufficient power there for being able to make inferences? How are the animals selected? Are they randomized? Do you have controls or groups and validation? How were the samples collected? Are there confounding factors considered? Is there animal handling or ethical concerns? Then into results. This should tell a coherent story about what happened. It should be logical. You should be able to follow what is being said in the results and be able to know that, yes, they did these methods they used these tests in the methodology, and the results are presented from those, say it's bacteriology and they were looking at MICs, you should be able to see that in the results section. You shouldn't be that it's not there. They just decided that, well, it didn't work, and so I just decided not to include it in the results section. So do they accurately and clearly represent what was described in the methods? Does it match the methods? Are all the study animals accounted for in the results? Have all the relevant data been included? Are the analyses appropriate? Is the data described consistent with data in the figures in the tables? Are the figures in the tables all listed in the results section that are also added to the manuscript? Do they add to the paper, or in some instances, people will have a table of results, but then they'll also have that table represented as a figure. You don't need a figure and a table. You should just have one or the other. What are the quality of the photo micrographs? So are you able to see what they see in the photo micrographs? Have they annotated those appropriately so that you can see what they're saying in the results section, that you can actually look at the figure and say, yes, I can see that? And do the authors logically explain the findings? In the discussion and the conclusion, so this is wrapping it up. This is interpretation of your results. This is talking about the literature and justifying your interpretations with what is found in the literature, or having a contrary opinion to what is in the literature because you're showing evidence to the contrary. And then a summary: what is the next step and how is this important? What's the implications? So do they logically explain those? Are there comparison with current findings? Do they have the key studies cited? Are conclusions supported by the data? Do they cite other research? What are the limitations, and how do they identify those limitations? And what do they say about them? And how do they say that the research can be improved if they were to do it again or move forward? And what are the implications? Same with tables and figures. Are they clearly presented and appropriate? Because they illustrate the data, and this is what how you're viewing the data that they've described in their results. Are the tables and figures consistent with the text? Are they all mentioned in the text? Do they have appropriate headings and so on, as I said? Do they include measures of variance? Is the legend well represented of what is being presented? Is it one line? This graph shows X versus Y. Does it tell you how many numbers there are, an N value? Does it indicate what the abbreviations are? Does it tell you what the groups are? So things that can make the figures stand alone and help you to understand the reader to understand what is being presented. And then the references. So as I said, the copy, when it gets to the copy editor stage, they will go through the journal, the manuscript, and look for to make sure that citations match what's in the text versus what's in the manuscript. But the reviewer can do that too. They can look to see what are the references. Are they suitable? Do they cite? Should the authors, are they complete? Are they written appropriately? generally, if you find that, have they taken the time to cite them appropriately, or is it sloppy? And if it's kind of sloppy and haphazard and not done very well, is that a reflection on the rest of the research that's being presented in the paper? So suggested language for tricky situations. So if you say the manuscript is fatally flawed, you might want to say the authors have missed something crucial, it does not appear to be sound, and then say why. You don't completely understand the manuscript. I don't understand the manuscript. The authors, maybe it should be better, authors should clarify the following sections to avoid confusion. The technical details don't make sense. Technical details should be expanded and clarified to ensure that readers understand exactly what the researcher studied. So, and the writing is terrible. The author should revise the language to improve readability, or the manuscript would benefit from review by an English language service. The authors have overinterpreted the findings. Alternative, the authors aim to demonstrate X, Y, Z. However, the data does not fully support this conclusion specifically. Then the authors appear to have no idea what they're talking about. I don't think they have read any of the literature on this topic. Better, the study fails to address how the findings relate to previous research in this area. The author should rewrite their introduction to discussion to reference related literature, especially recently published works such as Darwin et al. And then it's obvious that this type of experiment should have been included. I have no idea why the authors didn't use it. This is a big mistake. Perhaps the authors are off to a good start. However, this study requires additional experiments, particularly, and then state what it is. Alternatively, the author should include more information that clarifies and justifies their choice of methods. So maybe I should have said what you think, and then more politically correct things to say rather than what you think. So the bad reviews are non-objective, non-organized, and non-instructional or informative. It's basically like the reviewer only is what I call a snapshot reviewer. They just didn't read it, or read it very briefly, and then just decided they'd tell you whether they liked it or not. So there's no detail. And even if it's minor revision, the reviewer should still be able to justify the comments or the changes that they're requesting. Any major revisions without substantial detail, no justification, the overall reflection does not review the reviewer's comments. So let's say the reviewer has, this is a wonderful paper and it advances the science, and I think it's just fabulous, and then they give a minor revision or a major revision. It could be purely descriptive with no evaluation of content. The comments are too brief for the editor to understand the positive or negative aspects of the paper. They only talk about spelling changes or grammar, and they don't review all the sections. So this kind of a review makes it extremely difficult for myself and an associate editor to determine what recommendation it should have, and whether the review is actually a reflection of what the content is in the manuscript. And so that would necessitate then that I would read it, the associate editor would read it, we'd have to then have a discussion, or they would have to provide the reviews for this, or would have to go back out for the review, and then that adds to the time taken for the process. So for example, many grammatical issues, papers should be corrected for grammar and punctuation, very interesting and timely subject. Or this paper does not have a high archival value, should be rejected. Great paper, recommend acceptance. Anonymous peer reviews point out a considerable number of issues in need of attention, including a few that will require additional considerable effort. Well, what is the grammar, and why is it timely and an interesting subject? And why does it make it the paper? What makes the paper low archival value? What makes the paper great? You need to say what makes it great. And then, so there are no comments for suggestions to improve the manuscript, except for improving grammar in the first example. And then what are the few issues that require considerable effort? So you see that by asking those kinds of questions, you would flesh out the review, rather than just being like, oh yeah, this is great, I read it and I'm submitting my review. and then kind of the ugly ones. And when I said right at the beginning about civility, fortunately, I haven't had to encounter this yet. But this is when it's an unfair, biased, unrelated to the quality of the manuscript. Maybe you have a bias towards nationality or gender or English language criticism or a personal bias. It's discouraging. It's not giving any kind of constructive review or helpful review to the authors. It may unreasonably delay the process. It may be for your own gain. So that could be like reviewer misconduct, like I discussed at the very start of the presentation, expressing prejudice or conflict of interest, and just generally negative and unhelpful. So finally, like the recommendations that would come out of these reviews are accept, where we would publish it in its original form. And really that's oftentimes rare, because generally there are minor comments that reviewers would have. Minor revision, so the journal will publish the paper, there will be minor corrections, and typically we say that this would be the best outcome that authors would hope for. So a minor revision is generally an accept, but with a few changes that are required to be made. Major revision, so I said here, the journal will publish the paper, but that's not technically true. So what we're saying is that you're asking for major revisions to be changed, to be made. They could be substantive, including reanalysis of data or additional data that needs to be provided, restructuring of the manuscript. It may be that it's too long, and it may be told, the authors may be told that it has to be a short communication rather than a manuscript, or vice versa, that they submitted a communication, but there's not enough information there and more information is required. And major revision can go back and forward a few times, but it doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of that process, it would be accepted. It could also be rejected. So we have reject and transfer, which is generally, I don't really like reject and transfer. I wish it was just transfer, because we're not really rejecting it. We're just saying it's not within the scope of the journal and it would be better reviewed at another journal. And then reject is that it will not be published or reconsidered, even if the authors make major revisions. So yeah, I've said that, So this one was interesting. It's a publication in 2015 where they're basically we're asking, is peer review just a crapshoot? Is it just by chance? Does it have any validity? And how well the reviewers evaluate the quality of papers. And so they asked, are the two reviewer recommendations of any paper more similar than one would expect by chance? Because as an editor, you may send out a paper and you may get one reviewer saying, yeah, I accept it, and the other reviewer saying, no, I reject it. And then what do you do? So you would have to go and find another reviewer. You would have to make your own assessment of it. We discuss it with the editor. How many times does this occur, and what kind of influence does it have on editors' decisions to accept or reject papers? And then the last question that this group asked was, does greater variability in reviewer recommendations of a paper result in a lower chance of acceptance in contrast to a paper that gets more consistent reviews? So if you have two reviewers that are divergent reviews, is that going to have a more effect on what kind of decision is made versus if the two reviewers are similar? So they did a little study and they found that reviewers' recommendations strongly influence the outcome of the review process and the decisions by editors. So it shows here how important it is that the reviews that come from the reviewers and the associate editors in informing the editor. That accept and minor revision were similar in their positive effects on editor decisions. So yes, they're saying if they're similar, then the decision is similar in terms of accept. that papers receiving at least one reject were almost always rejected. And that papers with more consistent reviews, where both reviewers recommend major, for example, had a greater chance of acceptance than did papers with more variation. So that's really showing the same as the last point, that minor revision and reject. So their outcome from this study was that the results demonstrate the review process is not a crapshoot, which is a good thing, and that reviewers provide useful information and the editors use this to make reasonable decisions. So finally, the take-home message: despite all these difficulties, the peer review process is still important, and it's a decisive part of the publishing process. That there's a theme that goes through in all the roles that I've identified in that process about integrity, confidentiality, disclosure of conflict of interest, timeliness, giving a good, thorough review, and being civil and professional in your responses back to the authors. In that sense, academics do not want to see a degradation in research integrity, and editors will continue to do the best to face the ongoing struggles with peer review. So the final word of advice for authors is learn to value the peer review process, even if it may take longer than you expect it to. And that's the end.
That was an incredible presentation, echoing the compliments in the chat box. Shona, that was really interesting and a lot of good stuff there. I'm glad we have it recorded. Where's my check? Oh, there we go. We're over time, so if folks have to leave, that's okay. I got two quick questions for you, though, that came into the chat that I think a lot of folks will be interested in. The first one: can someone join a journal's editorial board with no academic affiliation? For example, somebody from Fish and Wildlife Service, could they join?
I'm not sure, but I think that they should be able to join. I don't see that there's a requirement for being affiliated with an academic institution. I think it's more based on your expertise and your ability to review, or in terms of being an editor, your expertise and your scope of the type of research that you do. So I'd say no, you could be an editor, you could be part of an editorial board for Journal of Aquatic Animal Health anyway. I would advocate for that, because we do need, the more associate editors that we have, the more it alleviates the pressure on the existing associate editors. So if there are individuals out there, out in the audience, or you know of individuals who would be good and have an interest in that, then they should submit their names to me or Jeff. And if they want, to the journal office, and say that they're willing to be considered associate editor.
Great. Well, hopefully you get a few after this stuff. So. And the second question, and this is a big question, we don't have a lot of time, but with the sort of like the artificial intelligence revolution that's happening right now, the pros and cons to something like a chat GPT for the publication process, there's opinions on both ends of the spectrum. I'm curious, and one of the comments in the chat here, curious about how Journal of Aquatic Animal Health, or the AFS journals more broadly, are approaching that. So
I did have a slide in the presentation about that, and I took it out because I knew I was too many slides and I was going to go over time, which I did, and I apologize for that. But Wiley does have a statement on that, as do Elsevier and Taylor Francis. They all have statements on what their policy is for artificial intelligence and how they what they consider appropriate and not, what they consider an author to be, how they plan to deal with that. So I'd encourage whoever it was that asked the question, or anybody else that's interested in that, to go to the website type that in, go to Wiley or type it in general, and you'll see what each of the journals are, what their policy is, and they have it outlined exactly on what they consider to be, I actually have it here, I printed it out, but what they consider published work or research design. And then, like, for example, they say that they have a committee on publication ethics, which has a position statement on artificial intelligence tools that says that these tools cannot fulfill the role of nor be listed as an author of an article. And so they specifically state what they consider to be an author and what they don't in that context of artificial intelligence. And it's interesting as well. I know that in the conferences taking place right now in Grand Rapids, they were going to have a session on that for individuals to ask questions. So it is coming, and I think it will be challenging, I think, because it will make the job harder for editors and publishers to decipher what is fraudulent or manipulated. So I'm sure that whatever the statements are right now on the publisher's website will evolve and change as that becomes more and more prevalent.
Yeah, it's going to be one interesting topic to follow for sure. Fun never ends. Well, thank you very much, Shona, for the great talk and presenting to us today.
Thank you.